Between 1968 and 1969, a killer terrorized Northern California's Bay Area, leaving 5 people dead and 2 survivors scarred forever. The Zodiac killer taunted police with cryptic letters and bizarre costumes, claiming 37 victims, though only 5 were confirmed. But behind the infamous case are real people whose futures were stolen. This is what happened to every victim of the Zodiac killer. The first victims, Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday. December 20th, 1968, Lake Herman Road, Benicia, California. 2 teenagers went on their first date together and never came home. Betty Lou Jensen was just 16 years old, a junior at Hogan High School and an honor roll student. She was a member of the Pythian Sunshine Girls and the Christian Science Church. This was the first date her parents had ever allowed her to go on. David Faraday was 17, a senior at Vallejo High School. He was an Eagle Scout who had recently received the God's Country Award, one of scouting's highest honors for religious reverence. He was also on the school's wrestling team. Both were described by friends and family as quiet, studious, and with little time for dating. That evening, David picked up Betty Lou at 8 p.m. After meeting her parents, they left to attend a Christmas concert at her school. Just 3 blocks away, they were supposed to be home by 11 p.m., but they had other plans. There was no concert at Hogan High School that night. They didn't show up at any known parties either. Instead, they visited Betty Lou's best friend and talked about possibly going to San Francisco. By 11:10 p.m., they were parked on Lake Herman Road, a remote lover's lane on the eastern outskirts of Vallejo. What happened next would become the first chapter in one of America's most infamous unsolved cases. Someone approached their vehicle and opened fire with a .22 caliber semi-automatic pistol. Betty Lou was shot 5 times in the back as she tried to flee. She died instantly, her body found 28 feet from the car. David was shot once in the head at point-blank range. When Stella Borges discovered the scene around 11:15 p.m., David was still breathing. He died en route to the hospital, never regaining consciousness. The murders shocked the community. Police initially investigated whether the killings were drug-related, after hearing that David had once confronted a marijuana dealer. A jealous ex-boyfriend of Betty Lou's was also investigated, but had a solid alibi. With no viable suspects and no clear motive, the case went cold. For 7 months, the murders remained an unsolved mystery. Then, in July 1969, everything changed when a killer claimed responsibility and gave himself a name: the Zodiac. Betty Lou and David's families were left to grow old without them. They never got to see their children graduate, go to college, get married, or have families of their own. As one researcher noted, had they lived, Betty Lou and David would be in their 70s today, senior citizens looking back on long, happy lives with children and grandchildren. Instead, their names have become footnotes in true crime history, often overshadowed by the legend of their killer. The 50th anniversary of their deaths in 2018 brought renewed attention, but their families still wait for answers about who took their loved ones away on that cold December night. The 4th of July attack Darlene Ferrin. On July 4th, 1969, 7 months after the Lake Herman Road murders, the killer struck again. This time, the victim was 22-year-old Darlene Elizabeth Ferrin. Darlene was a popular waitress at Terry's restaurant in Vallejo. She was married to Dean Ferrin and was a new mother to her infant daughter, Dina. Born Darlene Suennen, she was the oldest of 10 siblings, 8 girls and 2 boys. Her sister, Pam Huckabee, would later describe her as the oldest and my idol, and say she was very family-oriented. That 4th of July evening, Darlene picked up her friend Michael Mageau, who was 19 years old. Around midnight, they were sitting in Darlene's brown Corvair at Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo, about 2 miles from the Lake Herman Road crime scene. Another vehicle entered the parking lot, left briefly, then returned. The driver approached Darlene's car with a flashlight. She and Michael initially thought it might be a police officer. Instead, the person opened fire with a 9mm handgun, shooting through the passenger window. Darlene was hit multiple times and pronounced dead on arrival at Kaiser Foundation Hospital at 12:38 a.m. Just 2 minutes later, at 12:40 a.m., the Vallejo Police Department received a chilling phone call. A man's voice said, "I want to report a murder. If you will go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway, you will find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." This was the first time anyone had connected the Lake Herman Road murders to a new crime. This was the first time the world heard from the Zodiac. In the years that followed, Darlene's case became surrounded by controversy and conflicting stories. Her sisters, Pam and Linda, made various claims about Darlene knowing her killer, being stalked by a mysterious man, and even witnessing a murder. These stories evolved over time and included tales of painting parties, satanic cults, and strange phone calls. However, Vallejo police found these claims unreliable. Detective George Bewart, who investigated harassment claims made by Pam, called her nutso. Darlene's husband Dean said the sisters were prone to prevarication. The evidence strongly indicated that Darlene was the victim of a random attack, not a targeted killing. What made the case even more mysterious were the anonymous phone calls made to Darlene's parents on the night she died. These calls were made before the media released the victims' names and came to the family's unlisted number. If the Zodiac made those calls, it raised the disturbing question of how he knew the phone number and last name of Darlene's parents. The impact on Darlene's family has been devastating and ongoing. Her daughter Dina was only a few months old when her mother was killed. She grew up without ever knowing Darlene and is now a dental assistant living in the Bay Area and a mother herself. Darlene's parents died without ever knowing who killed their oldest daughter. Her sister Pam has received phone calls every July 4th for over 35 years from someone claiming to be the Zodiac. As Pam explained, when everybody's out celebrating the birth of our country, I am here mourning the death of my sister. Pam believes she narrowly missed witnessing the attack as she was leaving the parking lot just as the killer's car arrived. The family has lived with the weight of this tragedy for over 50 years, always wondering what might have been different if Darlene had survived that night. The survivor, Michael Renault. Majot is the only person to survive being shot by the Zodiac killer. Born on October 29, 1949, Michael was just 19 years old and living an ordinary teenage life in Vallejo when his world changed forever. His father operated a pest control business in the area. On that fateful 4th of July night in 1969, Michael was with Darlene Ferrin at Blue Rock Springs Park when the killer approached their vehicle. The attack was brutal and terrifying. Michael was shot multiple times with a 9mm Luger, hit in the jaw, knee, shoulder, and mouth. After the initial burst of gunfire, Michael tried to escape by flipping into the back seat of the car. When the killer returned to fire more rounds, Michael played dead. This decision likely saved his life. When police arrived, they found him lying near the rear of Darlene's car, on his back, critically wounded but alive. From his hospital bed, Michael provided investigators with the only eyewitness description of the Zodiac from someone who survived a shooting. He estimated the attacker was about 5'8", tall, stoutly built, but not fat, aged between 25 and 30, with curly brown hair. However, Michael also noted that due to the extreme pain and shock, his recollection of the attacker's appearance might not be entirely accurate. Years later, Michael would identify Arthur Lee Allen, the chief Zodiac suspect, in a photo lineup as his attacker, though this connection was never proven, and Allen died in 1992 without ever being charged. The attack's impact on Michael's life cannot be overstated. He was shot in the face, causing severe injuries that meant he couldn't walk or talk for a long time, according to Darlene's sister. The trauma went far beyond the physical wounds. Michael became reclusive, struggling with what some reports described as substance dependency, though these claims remain unverified. He experienced homelessness for a period of time. As researchers have noted, his encounter with the Zodiac profoundly altered his life. Over the decades, Michael has largely remained out of the public eye, though he has made a few appearances. In the early 1990s, he was confronted by Darlene's sister Pam on Geraldo Rivera's show, Now It Can Be Told, where she asked if he knew the Zodiac's identity. In 2007, he worked as a consultant on David Fincher's acclaimed film Zodiac. He appeared on BuzzFeed Unsolved True Crime in 2016 and Biographics in 2020 to discuss his survival experience. Interestingly, in 2019, he was involved in the art department for Looney Tunes cartoons. Today, at approximately 74 years old, Michael values his privacy intensely. Very little information is available about his current situation. Darlene's sister has said she tried multiple times to connect with him over the years, but was unsuccessful. His silence has frustrated investigators and amateur sleuths who believe he may hold crucial information about the case. But Michael's choice to maintain distance from the case is understandable. He is not just a witness. He is a victim who has had to live with the physical and psychological scars of that night for over 55 years. He survived the unthinkable, and how he chooses to live with that survival is his own decision to make. The Lake Berryessa victim, Cecilia Shepard. On September 27, 1969, the Zodiac killer changed his pattern in a terrifying way. For the first time, he attacked in broad daylight. For the first time, he wore an elaborate costume. And for the first time, he used a knife instead of a gun. The victim was 22-year-old Cecilia Ann Shepard, and her death would become one of the most haunting chapters in the Zodiac story. Cecilia was born in Nuzvid, India, likely to a missionary family, and grew up in California. She graduated from Loma Linda High School and attended Loma Linda University before transferring to La Sierra College. By 1969, she was a fifth-year senior music major at the University of California, Riverside. She was a former Pacific Union College student who had returned to the campus that weekend to to visit friends. Cecilia was described as having close friendships within the Seventh-day Adventist community and was remembered by those who knew her as someone with a bright future ahead. That afternoon, Cecilia was with Brian Hartnell, her ex-boyfriend with whom she had maintained a close friendship. According to a roommate, Cecilia was very much in love with Brian and looked forward to a future together. They had initially planned to go to San Francisco, but decided at the last minute to go to Lake Berryessa instead since it was getting late. Around 6:30 p.m., they were picnicking at a remote cove at the beautiful man-made lake in Napa County. Cecilia noticed a man watching them from a distance. The man disappeared behind a tree, and when he emerged, he was wearing a black executioner's hood with clip-on sunglasses. On his chest was a white bib with a 3/3-inch crossed circle symbol. He brandished what appeared to be a .45 caliber gun and approached the couple. The man claimed to be an escaped convict who had killed a guard and needed their car and money to get to Mexico. Brian offered his wallet and car keys, but the intruder wasn't interested in them. Instead, the man forced Cecilia to tie up Brian with pre-cut lengths of plastic clothesline. Then, he tied up Cecilia himself, tightening the knots. Even then, Brian believed they were simply being robbed. But when the man drew a knife with a 10 to 12-inch blade and wooden handle, the robbery turned into a massacre. Cecilia was stabbed 10 times, 5 wounds in the front and 5 in the back. She fought for her life, struggling against her attacker. After the attack, a fisherman heard the victim's screams and called for help. Brian managed to untie Cecilia's ropes with his teeth, and she freed him. When Napa County deputies arrived, Cecilia was conscious and gave a detailed description of their attacker. She described his brown hair hanging down across his forehead, visible through the hood's eye holes. She estimated he weighed between 225 and 250 pounds and stood between 5'8" and 5'10" tall. Crucially, she indicated she had seen the man's face and did not know him. This confirmed that the attack was random, not personal. Cecilia was rushed to Queen of the Valley Hospital in Napa by ambulance. During transport, she lapsed into a coma. She never regained consciousness. 2 days later, on September 29, 1969, Cecilia Ann Shepard died from her injuries. She was just 22 years old, on the brink of completing her education and starting her life with someone she loved. The attack on Cecilia represented a dramatic escalation in the Zodiac's violence. The elaborate costume, the knife attack, the calculated cruelty of tying them up first. All of it pointed to a killer who was growing bolder and more theatrical. Before leaving the scene, the killer wrote on Brian's Carmen Ghia car door with a black felt-tip pen, listing the dates of previous attacks and adding Sep 27 to 69 to 6:30 by knife. The police photographed everyone who attended Cecilia's funeral, hoping the killer might appear, though the whereabouts of those photos remain unknown today. Cecilia's death was particularly tragic because she did everything she could to survive. She fought back. She gave investigators detailed information about her attacker. But unlike Brian, who played dead and survived, Cecilia's fight cost her her life. Her friends and family lost a bright, loving young woman who had her whole future ahead of her. She remains the only confirmed knife attack victim of the Zodiac killer, and her memory deserves to be honored beyond the shadow of her killer's legend. The survivor, Brian Hartnell. Brian Calvin Hartnell is the only person to survive a knife attack by the Zodiac killer, and his survival story is one of remarkable courage and willpower. Born on July 1st, 1949 in Walla Walla, Washington, Brian was 20 years old and a junior pre-law major at Pacific Union College when the attack occurred. He was described as lively, cheerful, and determined to make a name for himself. He was a brilliant student with great aspirations for the future. On that September afternoon at Lake Berryessa, Brian was with his ex-girlfriend, Cecilia Shepard. They had maintained a close friendship after their romantic relationship ended. When the hooded attacker appeared and forced them into submission, Brian offered his wallet and car keys, trying to cooperate to avoid violence. He was forced to be tied up first by Cecilia, then the killer tightened the bonds. Even when the Zodiac drew the knife, Brian still believed they were simply being robbed. He had no idea murder was the true intention. The killer stabbed Brian 6 times in the back. In that critical moment, Brian made a decision that would save his life. He feigned death, he played dead, lying as still as possible while the killer finished his attack on Cecilia. After the attacker left, Brian managed to stay conscious through what he later described as a combination of strong faith and an equally strong will to live. He untied Cecilia's ropes with his teeth and she freed him. He then crawled to the roadside to alert police, setting successive goals to keep his mind active and fighting through the shock and pain. From his hospital bed at Queen of the Valley Hospital in Napa, Brian became something of a local celebrity. He gave press interviews while recovering, including a notable interview with CBS Bay Area affiliate KPIX TV. What struck many people was Brian's remarkable composure and even his sympathy toward his attacker. He said, I don't think he was acting under his total, complete consciousness. If you don't mind me using the word sick, you can't hold this against him. But the real concern that I have is that he doesn't do this again. Brian provided investigators with a detailed description of the attacker, estimating he was 5'8 to 5'10 tall, weighing between 25 and 250 pounds with brown hair. This description matched what Cecilia told police. However, Brian's description notably did not match Arthur Lee Allen, the chief Zodiac suspect. Allen was much taller and was balding. This discrepancy has led some to believe that Brian's description may have unwittingly contributed to the murderer escaping justice, though new evidence in recent documentaries continues to link Allen to the crimes. After recovering from his physical wounds, Brian rebuilt his life with quiet determination. He married a woman named Monica, and together they had 2 children, Benjamin and Jonathan. Brian became an attorney and established his own law firm, Hartnell, Lister, and more, specializing in probate and civil concerns. He resides in Redlands, California. Over the years, Brian made several media appearances. In 1919, he appeared in Case Reopened. In 2007, he worked as an unpaid consultant on David Fincher's film Zodiac, and even secured a brief cameo in the film, appearing at the 1 hour, 36 minutes, and 28 seconds mark in a scene on the San Francisco Police Department stairs. He also appeared on BuzzFeed Unsolved True Crime in 2016 and the Today in True Crime podcast in 2019. His brief acting appearances may have been his way of processing and dealing with the trauma. By 2009, Brian had adopted a life of privacy. He stopped giving interviews to the media, preferring not to think about the past anymore. Now, over 55 years after the attack, Brian maintains his own counsel on the case. He has successfully rebuilt his life, representing resilience in the face of unimaginable trauma. He is the only person to survive a knife attack by the Zodiac killer, and his survival stands as a testament to the power of will, faith, and the human spirit's determination to live. While he carries the memories of that September day, he has chosen to focus on his family, his career, and moving forward rather than remaining trapped in the past. The final victim, Paul Stine. On October 11th, 1969, just 2 weeks after the Lake Berryessa attack, the Zodiac killer struck again. This time, the murder would be different in almost every way. The victim was Paul Lee Stine, a 29-year-old cab driver, and his death would mark the last confirmed Zodiac killing. Paul Stine was not a teenager on a date or a college student on a picnic. He was a working man trying to build a better future. He was married and working as a driver for a yellow cab in San Francisco while pursuing his PhD. Paul was just months away from completing his postgraduate work, scheduled to finish in January 1970. He worked various jobs to pay his way through college, driven by the dream of a better life with his wife. He wanted comfort, security, and the opportunities that education could provide. On the evening of October 11th, Paul climbed into his taxi cab to begin his night shift, expecting it to be like any other. He picked up a passenger near Union Square in San Francisco. The man directed Paul to drive to Presidio Heights, an upscale residential neighborhood. It was a routine 3-mile fare, approximately 30 miles from where the previous Zodiac attacks had occurred. When they reached the destination at the intersection of Washington and Cherry Streets, the passenger revealed his true purpose. The killer shot Paul once in the head at point-blank range with a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. It was a different 9mm than the one used to kill Darlene Ferrin. Across the street, witnesses saw a man handling the driver's body. The killer rifled through Paul's clothes, then did something he had never done before. He tore a piece of Paul's shirt, which he would later mail to the San Francisco Chronicle as proof of his identity. The killer then wiped down the vehicle with a cloth or rag before calmly walking away from the scene. This murder represented a complete deviation from the Zodiac's previous pattern. Paul was not part of a young couple. He was a lone male, working alone, not at a remote lover's lane, but in a residential neighborhood. The killer had come to his victims before. Now, Paul had unknowingly driven the killer to his own execution site. The Zodiac took a trophy from Paul's body, something he had not done with the other victims. And most significantly, witnesses got a good look at the killer, providing the only police sketch of the Zodiac that investigators had. The witnesses' descriptions and fingerprints found on the outside of Paul's cab gave police the most concrete physical evidence in the entire case. The piece of Paul's shirt definitively linked the murder to the Zodiac letters. This was the closest law enforcement had ever come to catching the killer. Yet somehow, despite officers being in the area within minutes and even passing a man matching the suspect's description, the Zodiac escaped. Paul's death devastated his family. His older brother, Joe Stine, who was 34 years old and a veteran of both the Army and Air Force, was especially vocal about his grief. Joe told the media, "I was very close to Paul. I had helped him financially toward his education. He would have completed his postgraduate work in January. January. Joe made a bold decision in his grief. He issued a public challenge to the Zodiac Killer, releasing his own work schedule and home address to the San Francisco Examiner. He said, "Now I want a chance at his killer." He appeared on KPIX News from Modesto, attempting to draw the Zodiac out into the open. His challenge went unanswered. Paul Stine's murder would be the last confirmed Zodiac killing. In subsequent letters, the Zodiac stated that he would no longer announce his murders and that he would disguise his future crimes as routine robberies, killings of anger, and fake accidents. This created an unsettling question that haunts investigators to this day. Did the Zodiac stop killing, or did he simply stop taking credit? Paul's legacy is preserved in one of the most famous crime scene photographs in true crime history. His image is frozen in time, forever trapped at age 29, just months away from achieving his educational goals. His death represents not just a life cut short, but a future stolen. His wife lost her husband on the brink of the better life they had worked so hard to build. His brother's desperate challenge speaks to the helplessness families feel when justice remains out of reach. Like all the Zodiac's victims, Paul Stine deserved justice. More than 55 years later, his family is still waiting. The unsolved mystery and lasting impact. More than 5.5 decades after the first attack, the Zodiac Killer case remains one of the most infamous unsolved mysteries in American history. As of 2025, the case is officially open and unsolved. The FBI reaffirmed this status in 2021. By 2009, the San Francisco Police Department had investigated an estimated 2,500 suspects. According to a 2022 estimate, approximately 50 to 100 new suspects are named every year. The killer sent over 20 letters to newspapers and police between 1969 and 1974, 4 of which contained cryptograms. 2 have been solved in 1969 and 2020. 2 remain unsolved. The Zodiac claimed to have killed 37 people, though only 5 murders have been confirmed. The primary suspect has always been Arthur Lee Allen, a teacher and convicted child molester from Vallejo. He remains the only person ever publicly named as a suspect by police. The circumstantial evidence against Allen was compelling. He owned boots that matched footprints left at one crime scene. He discussed a short story that the Zodiac referenced in his letters. Most significantly, survivor Michael Mageau identified Allen in a photo lineup as his attacker. However, survivor Brian Hartnell's description of the Lake Berryessa attacker did not match Allen, who was much taller and balding. Allen died in 1992 without ever being charged. Recent years have brought new attention to the case. Netflix's 2024 docuseries This Is the Zodiac Speaking presented evidence from the Seawater family, who knew Arthur Lee Allen intimately. The documentary indicates that Allen was present at all of the Zodiac's known crime scenes and was close by for 3 additional unsolved murders. In 2021, a group called the Case Breakers claimed that Gary Francis Post, who died in 2018, was the Zodiac Killer. However, police have maintained that this connection remains unverified. In 2022, author Jarrett Kobek proposed that Paul Dorr, who died in 2007, was the killer. Numerous other suspects have been proposed over the decades, but none have been definitively proven. The impact on the 2 survivors has been profound and lasting. Brian Hartnell built a successful life as an attorney, husband, and father. He worked on the 2007 film Zodiac and made several media appearances, but by 2009, he had adopted a life of privacy. While he has rebuilt his life, he likely carries survivor's guilt, knowing that he lived while Cecilia Shepard and others did not. Michael Mageau's life was profoundly altered by the attack. He struggled with addiction and homelessness for years. Now, 74 years old, he remains intensely private. Both survivors showed incredible bravery in providing information to investigators despite their trauma, giving law enforcement valuable insights into the killer's appearance and methods. The impact on the victims' families has been devastating and enduring. Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday's families have lived for over 56 years with the knowledge that their children's lives were frozen at their teenage deaths, wondering what might have been. Darlene Farron's daughter, Dina, grew up without her mother and is now a mother herself. Darlene's sister, Pam, receives phone calls every July 4th from someone claiming to be the Zodiac and mourns her sister while others celebrate. Darlene's parents died without ever knowing who killed their oldest daughter. Cecilia Shepard's family lost a promising young woman who was in love and had a bright future ahead. Paul Stine's brother, Joe, issued a public challenge to the Zodiac that went unanswered, representing the helplessness families feel when justice is denied. All these families have grown old carrying the weight of unsolved murders, with anniversary dates bringing renewed trauma each year. The Zodiac case has become a fixture of American true crime culture. It has inspired countless books, films, and documentaries, most famously David Fincher's 2007 film Zodiac. amateur sleuths continue investigating through online forums and websites. Discussion and debate about the case's details remain active decades later. However, this cultural legacy comes with a cost. The victims' names are often overshadowed by the killer's mystique. The human stories behind the statistics get lost in the fascination with codes, letters, and suspects. 56 years since that first attack on Lake Herman Road, the mystery endures. 5 lives were cut short, and countless futures were stolen. 2 survivors carry physical and psychological scars that will never fully heal. Families continue seeking closure that may never come. But amid the endless speculation about the killer's identity, it is crucial to remember the victims as people, not just case files. Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday were teenagers full of promise. Darlene Ferrin was a beloved sister, wife, and mother. Cecilia Shepard was a talented music student in love with life. Paul Stein was a hardworking man on the verge of achieving his dreams. Michael Mageau and Brian Hartnell survived against the odds, but paid a price that lasted a lifetime. Hope remains that advances in forensic science, DNA technology, or new testimony might finally solve this case. The families and friends of the victims have grown old without them, keeping their memories alive and waiting for answers. Until that day comes, if it ever does, we must ensure that the victims of the Zodiac killer are remembered not as footnotes in a famous mystery, but as real people whose lives mattered and whose loss should never be forgotten.